Stories don't define you. How you tell them will.
Hi, I'm Sarah Elkins, your host and chief story maker at Elkins Consulting. In my work with coaching clients, I guide people to improve their communication using storytelling as the foundation of our work together. What I've realized over years of coaching and podcasting is that the majority of people don't realize the impact of the stories they share on their internal messages and on the people they're sharing them with. What really lights me up is guiding executives in uncovering the stories in their lives that are meaningful. The stories that, when shared with the right audience in the right way, connect, inspire, and motivate. Here's what a former client had to say about our work together. As a leader of leaders, I struggle with how and when to use my stories to emphasize the points my audience is looking for. It's a delicate balance between sounding like I'm bragging and delivering a message that needs to be heard. Sarah's approach to storytelling clears that obstacle so that you can deliver a clear and concise message using your stories to emphasize your points. It's truly amazing when it all comes together. Greg McDonough, Blackburn Capital Advisors, and president of the Entrepreneurs Organization of Washington, D.C. Visit elkinsconsulting.com to learn more about working with me. My special guest today comes from an introduction from my friend Toddy Norum that I've known for, almost a decade via LinkedIn. And we have quite a few mutual contacts, which is very cool. But this one, when Toddy introduced me to this woman, I knew I had to get her on my podcast. She has some stories that will inspire, that will entertain, and that will make you want to do more good. That's just straight up what it is. So Bejanae Karim comes to us from Atlanta. And as my listeners know, I'm just going to start with asking you to share something about yourself that most people might not know.
So a couple of things come to mind. First, I would say my name is always a topic of conversation because as you see the name, sometimes it's not clear on how do you pronounce it. If you see it come across email, a lot of people assume I'm a male or I'm a man because of the name. They say B-E. Oh, that must be Benjamin. And I'm like, no, it's Bejanae, not Benjamin. So I get that quite often. And I guess the interesting thing about my name is that my father named me. And so he had a really good friend and his name was Bejanae. And so he just loved that name and just how beautiful that it sounded. And it's a Persian name. And so when he had me, unfortunately for him, I was not a boy. And so he was trying to find a derivative of Bejanae. So he named me Bejanae. So that's a little sneak peek into something interesting that probably many people don't know about where my name originates from.
I love that. And one of the reasons I love it is because I just think it's such a pretty name. And I think names are so important. And when we ask somebody how to pronounce their name so that we are being accurate, so we are reflecting them the way that they should be reflected, I think that gives it so much more honor. And people really appreciate knowing that you care enough that you want to pronounce it correctly. So I encourage our listeners, anytime you see a name that's interesting, ask about it because people like to be asked. So the other reason I love your name and the story behind it is because in the Jewish tradition, we name our children after people who have passed in order to continue their memory, to keep their memory alive and to honor those people who have passed. So whenever I hear that somebody was named for someone else that was a dear friend or a relative, somebody who was dearly loved enough to name your kid after them, right. It speaks volumes, first of all, about your dad, that he would care so deeply for somebody that he'd want to name his kid after that person and find so much beauty in a name. I mean, and so for him to pass that along to you, we just know that there's more to it and that this is a person who is compassionate and caring. So thank you for sharing that story.
Absolutely. And that's such a great knowing for you to share about the Jewish culture and tradition. So yeah, I definitely I think, value my name even more just by you sharing that nugget. I appreciate that.
Yeah, names are important, and they speak a lot about who we are. I think we live into our names
Exactly.
in some ways. So, but that's a whole other story, because I could talk about my kids' names and, and how Mad Max is absolutely listed to this day from Where the Wild Things Are, and Mad Max. But anyway, I don't want to go in that direction, because I really want to hear more about you, particularly. Before we hit record, you were telling me about your week. And
Yes.
if you could describe the week for our listeners, it kind of gave me a chill. So I'd like to hear it from you again, so I can get another chill, but also so our listeners can benefit from hearing it.
Absolutely. So we were just recapping and connecting about, how our weeks have gone and led up to this particular day. And I was expressing my joy, really, and pride in the fact that I am partnering with the United Way of Greater Atlanta. And we have been working very diligently over the past couple of months to launch this program called STEM Up Youth Maker Competition. And so what that entails is for local middle school and high school students to identify community issues and create a project that's going to solve it using STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics. And so students had to submit a proposal. We had volunteers to review those proposals, whittle them down to the top 3 finalists. And this week, just this past week, we held their Shark Tank-like pitch competition. So they had to come prepared with their slide deck, with their pitch deck, and pitch to these strange judges, on their projects that they never met before. And can I tell you, it was the highlight of my week. We all are busy with juggling this and that and dealing with the pandemic, but this really just reinvigorated and inspired me. I mean, they were so well prepared, energetic, imaginative, creative, well-spoken, just all of the above. And so it really literally brought joy and a tear to my eyes, because I was like, oh my goodness, we've been working so hard to launch this and for this to go well. And it did just that. It did just that, and empowered young minds, young leaders, really, so to speak. So that was part of my week. And so I'm so excited to see what they are able to accomplish in the community based on those project ideas that they pitched to us this past week.
So they got some funding as a result of winning this competition. Do all three of them get some funding? That
is correct. So the first place, they will receive $1,000. So can you imagine that?
For a middle school or high
school student, right? Winning $1,000. What? I wish.
I know.
I wish. And then the second and third place, they both get $500 each. So everybody walks away with something to help support and fund their project. And they're also partnered up with a STEM industry professional to help coach them to increase their chances of success of implementing or starting their project. So it's good things happening, big things happening here in Atlanta. So I'm excited.
I love this story. So tell me, okay, so you're leading up to it. You probably had, it was probably pretty stressful trying to make sure all the technology was working, because I'm sure you didn't do it in person, did you?
No, it was virtual via Zoom.
So right. I find that just as challenging as figuring out how to do something in person. And I have done both. I've organized both kinds of events, and they're equally challenging, just in very different ways. So it must have been kind of stressful. And then you were probably really in the moment, just listening and doing the active listening that I know you do. And then afterward, that sense of relief. Sometimes I tell people, I don't really have room for joy and happiness right now, because I'm filled with relief. So I just have to kind of live in that for a little bit. So I'm curious about a moment that pops into your head, like that when I say this, when I talk about this competition, what is an image that pops into your head about a particular moment? I mean, because I know you're a visual person. We kind of talked about that a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
What's the image that pops into your head?
I just see brilliant young people's faces is what comes to mind, like with smiles on their faces and of all colors is what I see, of all colors. So completely an inclusive group, boys, girls, Black, white, Asian, all the above. Like I just see a collective group of talented young minds.
So I'm imagining that you're looking at your screen right now, like as if it's going on and you have this Zoom image of their faces, right?
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. And the even more exciting part about it is that the top prize team were a group of mixed, they were fifth graders.
Whoa.
Yes. It was a mixed group of this middle school group age. But yeah, there were fifth graders in the group. And I'm like, wow, we definitely need to provide more opportunities for children starting early, of all backgrounds, to come up with community change, have them help us solve these critical issues, right?
Right.
So yeah, that's what comes to mind, their faces.
So let's dig into that a little bit. You're looking at their faces and you're having this moment where you're memorizing the image that you're seeing in front of you, which is the faces of the teams looking at you. Did you see all three teams at once? At some point, is that kind of your imagining, or are you imagining one particular team and their images looking at you?
So, you know how Zoom is set up. If you're not presenting a screen, then you can have like this grid Brady Bunch view. So,
exactly. The gallery view.
So yeah, right. The gallery view. Exactly. So yes, that's what I'm imagining. All of them, regardless of who was the top place winner, they were all winners.
Yeah, just getting to that point, being in the top three.
That is right. Exactly. Right. And just and not even just the creativity, but just on top of, think about the soft skills that they're learning and honing in for college and career readiness, like being able to speak in front of a group and command the room and to research beforehand so that you're knowledgeable of what your topic is, and to come up with, not only just to do the research, but to come up with solutions and a budget. Like that's a big thing. Like that's part of what I do in my job as an adult.
Right, exactly. And the enthusiasm. And it just sounds to me, so I'm imagining you in this moment because I'm right there with you. I'm sitting next to you and we're watching these kids' beaming faces coming from the Zoom gallery view. And what I'm getting from you is this combination of hope, that sense of we are going to be in good hands if we keep doing what we're doing. As long as we continue to bring these kids to a place where they have these opportunities, I have hope. But I also sense this great satisfaction in the diversity of who you're looking at. That seems to be what's coming through right now, is the meaning behind what you're seeing in terms of the diversity of who is looking at you from that screen.
Yes, that is spot on. Yes, you pulled it out of me. That's exactly it. Like you nailed it. Yes. So the hope, absolutely, just in terms of what future impact that just this little seed that we planted could have in their trajectory, but then also making sure that all are included is very critical and is very key. We know that there are academic gaps, and we know that there are education gaps, and there are gaps this and gap digital divides and things of that nature. And so absolutely, that we were able to provide an opportunity for all really means a lot, and that was part of the joy that I felt this week, and that sense of satisfaction.
I love that. I've been really focused lately on the stories of joy, and they can be, now that was kind of an epic moment for you. And so those are really important ones to capture. And when you tell a story with that kind of joy, you simply exude it. And we know from studying our brains that my neurons are mirroring yours. So when you feel and experience this joy and you can tell this story to me in this way, I am feeling it almost as much. It's lighting up the same part of my brain.
Transfer the energy. That's exactly right. That's
Absolutely.
Exactly right.
So I've been really focused on that. And it doesn't have to be an epic moment. That's what I keep telling my coaching clients. Those moments of joy that you're sharing, that you're capturing and being able to mirror for other people, or create a mirror of other people, they can be as simple as yesterday. I took a picture of the green coming up from my yard. Now I live in Montana and spring takes a long time to get here, but I saw these tulip bulbs coming up, and it's just the greens. There's no flower on it yet, but I'm seeing this green come up through that dark dirt. There's still snow here and there around us. And that was a moment of joy.
Joy and hope, right? Because you can see what's yet to come. And tulips are my favorite flower, by the way. So the fact that you're about to have some bloom, I'm giddy about that.
Yay, see, so we're mirroring each other's joy neurons. That's awesome. So that's in particular why I wanted to ask you to share that story again, even though you had already shared it with me. I want our listeners to be able to feel that same sense of joy and accomplishment. So I have to ask though, and this is getting into a level of detail I don't usually get into, but what was the winning idea? Do you remember? Can you describe it just briefly?
Yeah, absolutely. So the student team that was the top, who placed top, they wanted to address the academic learning loss that students are experiencing because of the pandemic. So we know because of the pandemic and for safety reasons and a variety of reasons, schools have been operating remotely. And so because of that, there are research studies that, there is academic loss because of that. It may, online learning may not be meeting all students' needs, right? Or there's some families who don't have access to the technology, or Wi-Fi is an issue, or there's a variety of things that's going on. So that it just compounds the issues of being able to address students' needs and their learning. And so their idea was to come up with I think it was an app that students could get tutorial support. So if they needed tutorial support in a particular area, they could go through the app and be paired up with a tutor to help support them to alleviate that academic learning loss. And it was so great, just in terms of their energy and how well thought out it was. And they even had a schematic of the flow of how the app would work, so to speak, like not a decision tree, kind of like a decision tree graphic, so to speak, in a way. Yeah. And so it was amazing. It was just amazing. Again, it's a true need. So, and that's generally what scientists, engineers, mathematicians, technologists, they solve problems, right? They're addressing something in society, either to make our life more comfortable or to solve a problem. And so they were doing just that. Like, okay, what's going on around me with my peers? What can we do using STEM? So
there's something so full of compassion about that idea. It's not just solving a problem that they're seeing in the people around them. They're experiencing it themselves, and they know how uncomfortable it is. And so they want to share some way of fixing that. I have to say, that describes to me compassion as much as it does anything else.
Exactly. I mean, not only thinking through how to solve the problem, but almost incorporating design thinking, because with design thinking, before you ideate, you empathize first, right? Like, what are people's pain points? What are the issues? And then what ideas can we come up to help, alleviate that? So you're absolutely right, Sarah, about that. Compassion, definitely grounded in that project.
So there's, in StrengthsFinder, one of the talents is called includer. And that's what that speaks to me, is that they don't want anyone to be left out. That it is meaningful to them. They understand the feelings that come with being isolated or excluded, and that includer strength is that person in your close-knit group that copies everyone on an email to make sure nobody feels left out. And the person who wants everyone to have a seat at the table, even if they don't necessarily have any authority or input, they just want them to be included so that there's not a feeling of exclusion. And of course, the way that gets in people's way sometimes is when you do have too many people in a room, decisions are harder to come to. And I don't have includer of my top strengths. So I'm always like, well, if you can't make a decision by committee. That just doesn't work. It takes too long. So let's make some decisions and then have people give us input about how we need to change it. But I love that these students are seeing that. I don't want to call them kids. I just avoided calling them kids. Like
young minds,
these young minds. Students can be any age,
change
right?
agents. I mean, any of those words.
Exactly, change agents. And I keep thinking about the word includer and compassion. And so, tell me, when you were a kid. Well, wait. First, I want to talk about this idea of STEAM, including arts in there. And I have to say, I am an artist. I'm a musician. I have been doing ceramic art for many, many years. And I am not a proponent of separating art from STEM.
Agreed.
And by putting an A in there, you're basically making it its own thing. And I truly believe that you have to incorporate art in all of them. And those students, by putting together their flow chart and design thinking, that's the art and creativity side of it. So
yes, absolutely.
It's kind of like, sorry, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to build off what you were saying. I think by putting the A in there, it's making the A more pronounced, because to me, the A is already integrated in STEM. However, we want to highlight and make sure that it's captured, because think about for science, for example, think about when you were in school and you were learning about the cell, right? A cell, what does a plant cell look like? And what does an animal cell look like? Or even thinking about learning about constellations and our solar systems. Like we are usually obtaining a lot of that information through diagrams, right? Someone had to draw those schematics.
Or we had to draw what we saw.
Or we had to draw them ourselves, exactly right. So there's arts naturally embedded in science. Same thing for mathematics, technology, engineering as well. That, by the fact that we're using Zoom right now to conduct this podcast, think of all the STEAM that had to happen in that.
Exactly.
Creating the visual model for people to be able to see each other on the screen. There had to be an artist behind that, the little toolbar and all the icons that's placed on there so people can understand what these icons mean intuitively. Like it's already there.
Part of the communication.
It is part of the process.
And when we make sure that we're doing it with intention, I think that's when it's meaningful. So as you were talking about the models that we use where we'd have to draw out a cell or something, how many of us made a cell or a virus with a marshmallow and toothpicks and or a bridge with gumdrops,
right? Exactly.
And that is art. And so, what I love about it is that I've never been great at drawing. Like I am. You do not want me sketching.
I'm a stick figure queen as well. No worries.
Thank you. I appreciate it. But you had me doing lettering, like calligraphy. I'm all over it. And so I think being able to enrich the STEM learning through a variety of media, creative media, you're incorporating it into everything when it's done intentionally. I think that's why artists really want the A in there. Is because it's not always intentional and it has to be intentional. I feel the same way about composition. I don't think English comp should be a separate class from anything, because I think it should be a part of every class. When you're writing a paper, you should be graded on your grammar and your ability to create a sentence that makes sense. And it's all about communication. So okay, off my soapbox now.
No, but I completely agree. And then even enhancing it even further from the visual arts and how can you integrate performance arts into science, technology, mathematics, right? So,
yes.
so for example, you said that ceramics is your jam, right? So how could you look at maybe ancient ceramic pottery of different nationalities or indigenous people, and maybe create some of those potteries and talk about the geometry and the chemical process that happens when you're making ceramics? Can you make a poem about it? Can you become the pottery and maybe explain the process through you go? So all those things like can be elevated
and talk about it.
Arts. That
right?
is correct. Yes.
Oh, you just totally lit me up, Bejanae, because I hadn't even like put that together. But your students were doing exactly that. They were including performance art.
That's right. Through
their presentation.
Through their pitch, they had a slide deck. So of course, with the slide deck, you can't just have you can, but they didn't have just a blank white, slide deck. They had graphics in there. Yeah, exactly. To illustrate their
images, photographs.
That's right. Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
I'm just totally energized right now. Like my brain is just going all kinds of directions. So what I would love to know is, when you were getting into this, like early on, I don't know if you were 2, if you were in 5th grade, if you were 30. I mean, because lots of us are late. I am a late bloomer. When was it? I know I don't believe in light bulb moments necessarily. I believe that we all have kind of dimmer switches. And so there are a lot of little incidents that lead up to something that is the light bulb moment.
Mm-hmm.
But when you think about your trajectory and how you got to where you are now, is there a person in a conversation or a specific project you worked on that when you look back, you're like, oh yeah, that was a pivotal conversation, or that was a pivotal project?
So it's interesting that you say that. So I definitely, for me, would say it's a case of, they always say the nature versus nurture, right? And I think it's both. I don't think it's one or the other. For me, I think I've been inclined to have a scientific approach to the things that I do, a methodical approach to the things that I do. So I'm thinking about a time, I want to say I definitely was probably in elementary school. It was a health class. And for some reason, we had some type of textbook that we had to read. No, it was a health book. And in the health book, it had mentioned about creating to-do lists. And so you could remember to do like certain health things, like brush your teeth or do this or do that. And that idea was just like like you said, it was a light kind of like, ooh. Yes. The to-do list, I like this concept, right? And even right now, I have little Post-it notes everywhere around
hold
me.
That up again. I'm going to do a screenshot of that. Okay, smile, because I'm going to do
note of things for me to do. So again, my methodical of, okay, this is how I'm going to structure this in my flow chart, right? And not only that, so that was one thing that really resonated with my little young brain, like, oh yeah, checklist. Okay. And I also can think back during that same time where I like to create like workbooks and things like that for my friends. Like I was the teacher and, here's your little workbook and we're going to go through this. And so thinking about what I do today, it's like I've come completely full circle. So like I still use the to-do list strategy. I have I have an electronic list on my phone, or, I have Post-it notes so I can scribe things out as I'm thinking about them. But then also like the curriculum creating piece. So in my work with BK International Education Consultancy, I'm the founder, the CEO. We provide 3 main services, and one is continuing education and training. So professional learning. We also provide curriculum design and project management. And so those are our 3 big service buckets. But we definitely have this passion, interest, advocacy for, STEM and STEAM. And our target audience tends to be school districts and nonprofits. And so thinking about Bejanae as a little girl and making these checklists and creating these books, it's like, okay, I'm still doing those exact same things today. So I guess this must be where I'm
Oh
supposed to
my
be in this
gosh.
point in time, in this point in time.
I am guessing when our listeners hear this, they're going to be thinking back about the things that they did as kids it was just this instinctive decision to do something and to keep doing it in a particular way. I know you immediately brought me back to playing teacher. I would teach my younger sister things. Whatever I was learning in school, she was learning. And she's 5 years younger than I am. So she was doing algebra in like third grade because I was doing algebra, whatever.
Teach one.
Right. And so we're continuing that. Like I still teach and coach, and I used to teach college classes. And I'm also thinking, as you're talking about creating workbooks and stuff, when we would be on a road trip or something, I would create like a word search for my sister or my brother, or I would do a connect the dots or like the dot. Yeah. Connect the dots kind of picture for them. And like, that was, oh my gosh, you have my brain all over the place right now.
And that was your artistic side coming out, right? With the dot pieces, and then even how to structure those squares with a certain angle to get the words in there.
Exactly. How many have to be, across and down, and yeah. And I'm trying to think of how I'm applying that now in so many different ways.
Yeah. And for me, like, so education, it wasn't necessarily my first step out of like college, so to speak. I did travel the science path first. So I actually went to school in undergrad. My major was in biology and chemistry.
Oh, wow.
And I thought immediately, I was like, yeah, I want to go into the environmental science field. And, I think had kind of like a service oriented, heart and mindset. So I felt like environmental science was a great way to do that. And then I learned about this program called Teach for America. And that was my entry point into education. And so since then I had taught, I think typically for Teach for America, core members, they serve a commitment of 2 years. But I stayed like 8 years past that. So I stayed in the school system for 10 years. And so during that time, again, this nurture versus nature piece. And I come from a family of educators. I also come from a family of entrepreneurs. I also come from a family who has like science background. And so it was like a melting pot, just kind of all merged together into BK International Education Consultancy. So, we have this education consultancy side, but then we have this arm where we do, support school communities around STEM and STEAM, because that's what makes up me, that's what makes up me from those early experiences. Mm-hmm.
Wow. So when you started this consultancy, I'd love to hear the story of one of the clients that was the client that when you think of your first success story, where you walked away going, yes, just full of that satisfaction, maybe not joy because you had so much relief, but I can see you're smiling. So you must have a client in mind.
I'm thinking back because it's been a couple of years now. We launched in 2012. And so,
wow, congratulations. That's 9 years.
I know, right?
That's awesome. Now that's a celebration to be had for sure.
Yes. I'm trying to think what client comes to mind just in terms of satisfaction. Oh my goodness, because there's so many over the years.
Is there an image that pops into your head of a project or a location?
I guess it's hard for me to sit on one, I guess is the.
Well, do you want me to ask some more questions to get there?
Okay. Probe a little bit.
Okay, I'll probe a little. Well, I'll share one of mine, and then maybe that will trigger one of yours.
Okay.
I remember early in my career, I was working as a PeopleSoft consultant in the late 90s in Washington, D.C. So I was working with a team at the World Bank. And I remember sitting at a table a big, long boardroom table, the old 90s looking boardroom, very dark wood. And it was all men in the room except me. I was like 25 or 26, sitting at this table with all men and all much older than me. And then the only other woman in the room wasn't even at the table. She was scribing. So she was like a secretary taking notes and older than me. And I remember sitting in the room and they were talking about how to collect certain data through PeopleSoft. And I had known enough about PeopleSoft at that point that I knew that each field had its own necessity. And there were very few fields that didn't touch other related reports and stuff later on. And they were talking about using a particular field in a certain way. And I don't know where I got the courage, but I said, I would not do that because if you change the use of that field, it's going to mess up these 3 reports when you run them. So you can collect the data somewhere else, but I wouldn't use that field for that purpose. And I remember this moment of feeling like this red blush coming up. I mean, this is the late 90s, which is still, we're still fighting this stuff, right? But I remember that blush coming up from my chest and my face getting kind of red as I was talking. And then I got quiet and all heads turned to the man next to me as if he had said it. And he nodded. He goes, yeah, that's right. Even though he didn't actually know. He didn't know anything about the PeopleSoft functions. He was like a senior level project manager. So he wasn't at that level of functionality. And he's like, yeah, that's right. And I remember kind of taking a deep breath and everybody saying, okay, so where should we put this data? And I walked out of there. I was disappointed that I didn't get the credit for it. They all were like, oh, thanks for saying that, Tim. As if I hadn't said a word. But At the same time, I remember walking away feeling satisfied that I knew what I was talking about and it was going to save that client some major problems later on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So now that you shared that story, so I would bring my mind to a recent client. And I think COVID has my brain a little foggy. Just it seems like what day is it today? It's all been merged into one long year. But so in addition to us providing support to school communities around STEM and STEAM, as I mentioned, continuing education and training, professional learning is one of our key core services. And so recently, at the end of last year, thanks to, I'm going to call it our quarantine creativity, we published a book called 12 Quick Steps to Writing Winning Classroom Grants. And so we were working with the school in helping to build their instructors' capacity on being able to find funding for their classrooms, because it's a common education culture that educators will spend out of their personal funds to support learning in the classroom. And so given, there have been budget cuts and, uncertainties with the economy and the switch to remote learning, teachers were doing this even more, because they care about their kids, And so with the school, I wanted to make this course to where they were able to bridge their understanding of lesson plan design, which they already do every day, and connect it with this whole new field of grant writing and not make it feel like completely foreign, because teachers are tapped and stretched for time. And so I didn't want to feel like it was adding another thing to their plate. I wanted to seem like a easy bridge to cross, so to speak. And so, we had a series of sessions, about this, unpacked the book for them pretty much. And at the end, I just got the best, I would say, testimonial, so to speak, just about, they're like, oh my God, yeah, I can do this. Like, this is so easy. Why,
Why was I so intimidated by it?
right. Why was I so intimidated about it, or have been spending my money when there's like billions of dollars out there that we could we could tap into. And so I think that piece for me, just in terms of like relief, because it was the first time of me conducting that training. But that was my key piece, is just to want to make sure that teachers saw that grant writing is not unreachable and is very much connected to the work that they're already doing.
And it doesn't have to be complicated.
Accomplished. Yeah. That was definitely accomplished. So,
oh, that's awesome. Did anyone in particular write you a note and say, this has changed my life? Thank you.
Absolutely. So I keep in contact with actually the school's finance manager. And so I was thinking of the time saver and the life-changing piece it would be at the educator level. But she had expressed and shared with me the impact that training is having on her as a finance manager or as an administrator of her school, because she had shared that, oftentimes we have a budget, a line item budget, we can spend it for this or for that. And teachers may come to us, but we may be tapped on how we could use the fund, or restricted to how we can use the funds, or how much they may need for something may be limited, or things of that nature. And we hate to have to turn them away and say,
they have a good idea. You want them to be able to implement it.
Exactly. And especially when you're thinking about STEAM, or, students working from home, they need access to tangible things. They need literacy books, and they need, this and that to continue to learning, especially for those types of kinesthetics and visual learner. And so, yeah, she was just sharing with me as an administrator. She was like, it has really been helpful for our school, because they're inspired, and they're thinking about all types of projects, different kind of projects that they can help fund and support now, in a greater sense, and increase their impact and reach with students and students' families, now that they feel like they have this skill underneath their belt. So I was like, wow, I didn't even think about that from the administrative side, but yeah, absolutely. We want to support, schools, in that way. So.
Oh my gosh. I love that. And that is, there's so much satisfaction. I hear this a lot from my clients, that when they put something out there, they have this particular intention, they're motivated by a particular intention. And then when they hear that it's being used in different ways that are valuable and inspiring, it just adds so much inspiration. You're like, okay, if I did that, what's going to happen when I do this?
That's right. That's right. Take it to the next level.
So are you starting to think about what that next level is going to be, what the next thing is going to be?
Absolutely.
Like more of these webinars, or?
Yeah, we would absolutely love to be able to provide more. Right now, we are hosting in partnership with Amazon, like where schools can order their books and things like that. But being able to have a coach there, a knowledgeable other who, one, has been an educator,
right.
We're educators.
You've been in the classroom.
Right. So we understand and how to bridge that language between the grant writing world and education, and coach them through. That's even more helpful and more meaningful than just reading a book on your own, right? Like that's great. The book is great, but to have that extra piece, that coaching piece and that guidance, like that, that's just top notch right there.
It is. And I think on top of the, confirmation of the things that they're reading in the book, when they hear it, it confirms for them some of what they were thinking about. But I think it also helps them. It makes it more approachable when a human being says, okay, I know this book, it lays it out, but you may still find yourself a little challenged or intimidated thinking about the time commitment. Let me walk you through this so you understand it is simpler than you think. Even reading the book simplifies it, but you may still have those doubts about whether you have time to do this. And here's how this works. I'm a big believer in coaching through things like that. I I think it's because I had taken lots of assessments in the past through my undergrad business degree and then my MBA, and then through different work environments. They have you take the real colors, or they have you take
the personality test.
All those assessments, right? And I never really got their value because I never had a coach walk me through why these characteristics are good. How do they help with my success? How do they make me successful? But also, where are they getting in my way when they're not used well? And it wasn't until I did the Strengths Finder that I actually had a coach walk me through the assessment and go, well, this is what this means. And can you think of a time when this really worked well for you? And okay, now let's look at the opposite. When did this get in your way? I'm like, oh, I can name dozens of times it got in my way. But so I love that you have that coaching option to go along with the book. And is that something our listeners would have access to?
That's absolutely right. Yeah. I mean, just think about it. Like if a tiny Bejanae or a tiny Sarah, you were in a classroom and someone just gave you this book and say, hey, go have at it, right?
Go read this book. This is great stuff.
Right. Go ahead. Go for it. Right. But that's why you have a teacher there, right? To unpack that for you and make those connections. So absolutely. So your listeners have access to me as well as those trainings. And the great thing about the trainings, even though the book is tailored to the education space, grant writing is the same across any and every industry.
Yeah. So
the tips in the book are going to be great tips for if you're a nonprofit, if you're a small business, whoever you may be, if you're interested in tapping into grant funds for your organization, for your project. So yeah, absolutely.
So the name of the book?
It's called 12 Quick Steps to Winning Classroom Grants.
Cool. Okay. So just for our listeners, as we come full circle and start to wrap this up, our listeners will want to know where to find you, where to find this information. And just so our listeners know, if you are on the road or out walking while you're listening to this, all of these links will be on the blog post associated with this podcast. So don't feel stressed about trying to find this information and jot it down, because Bejanae is not an easy name to say. It is an easy name to remember, but to spell maybe not. So tell our listeners, please, how to get a hold of you, all the things that you would want them to know about you in these last couple of seconds as we wrap this up.
Absolutely. So you can find us at www.bkconsultancy. So that's bkconsultancy.org. We're also on Instagram. Handle is at BK_consultancy. We're also on Twitter, Facebook at BK Consultancy, just one word. My email address is Bejanae, BEJANAE @bkconsultancy.org. Or the phone number is 678-820-9195. So we're on most social medias. There's our website, share the email address and the phone number. So we look forward to hearing from you.
I will also have a link to buy the book. Because I think a few of our listeners are grant writers or are interested in writing grants. I know we have lots of teachers that listen to this podcast and leaders who may find it an interesting idea to maybe think about grants in a different way.
Right. And helps to build their teachers' capacity or their school's capacity to acquire those funds. I mean, there's over $400 billion out there, y'all. Tap into it.
Seriously. It's there. And I think one of the things that people get hung up on is the strings that are attached to a lot of this money. But if you're doing your research and you plan, I mean, I know most government grants require 10% to be set aside for administrative stuff, which means the reporting. So you don't have to do this on top of the grant. You actually include that kind of administrative cost of the reporting processes. So I love this idea. And
And you know what I'll share with you, Sarah, for your listeners only, we have a grant funding checklist. So I'll send you the link to that in case people want to know, like, hey, am I even ready for a grant yet? It's a checklist to help them figure that out. So, and that'll be for free. That's for free.
Oh, awesome. Thank you. Oh, I'm excited to read that myself. I'll also put that, if it's okay, on the blog post associated with the podcast, because only listeners usually go there.
Great.
Excellent. Oh, I'm so excited for this. Bejanae, I just want to thank you for what you do in the world, because just even getting on this call with you, inspired, enlightened, you exude this energy that just makes me want to go do something. And it's exactly what I anticipated after looking you up and our back and forth on email before scheduling this recording. So thank you for what you do for our communities.
And likewise, thank you for sharing individual stories. Thank you for sharing our stories. We appreciate that, Sarah.
Oh, it's absolutely my pleasure. For our listeners, again, you'll be able to get all of those links on the blog post associated with this podcast on elkinsconsulting.com. Thanks, Bejanae. Are you ready to start your story portfolio so you have the right story ready to share when the opportunity presents itself? When you're ready to get started, my book, Your Stories Don't Define You, How You Tell Them Will, is available in all the regular places, and the audiobook version is available on Google Play and on my website, elkinsconsulting.com. As a special bonus for listeners, the audiobook includes 2 songs recorded by my band, Spare Change, in my living room in Montana. Also on my website is a free podcast interview checklist. It's available to download to make sure you make the most out of your next podcast interview. If you enjoyed this podcast, please feel free to rate the podcast and leave a review, and let me know that you've done it so I can thank you properly.
Thank you.